and the Byzantine era. In 312, Constantine becomes a Christian, and he's the Byzantine emperor at that time. His mother had been a Christian for a while, so she was influencing him. Let's all pray for mothers. And the Edict of Milan in the 313 permitted religious toleration for Christians. Previously, both Christians and Jews were being controlled by the Romans. Now the Romans began to think, maybe the Christians aren't so bad. So this raises the concept of supersessionism, which says that God is finished with the Jews and claims that the church is the new Israel and supersedes the Jews. There are still many people who believe that. And that doesn't mean that Christianity hasn't gone beyond. We've been given a revelation that the Jews weren't accepting at that time. But that does not mean that the Jews have no place in the story. And we see many other wise Christian teachers who taught that God was finished with the Jews. Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria, Origen of Alexandria, Eusebius. And these guys are really good Christians in many ways. They are writing good things. But St. Jerome, Gregory of Nyssa, we're into the 3rd and 4th centuries now, and the comments by the church fathers who are, setting the stage for the future. Some of these people, I won't mention which one is which, but this is the theme. Serpents, the Jews are serpents, the image of Judas, their psalms and prayers are the braying of donkeys. Brood of vipers, haters of goodness, Jews are inveterate murderers, possessed of the devil. Jews are abandoned by God, and God has always hated the Jews. And these people are all teaching Christianity. So we were getting a mixed bag into people's minds fairly early on. In the 2nd century, theologians and church fathers became very concerned with making the break with anything Jewish. And so we're missing out on our Jewish heritage in many ways. People kind of didn't really pay too much attention to the Old Testament. And blanket policies condemning the Jews became very common. But down through history, every so often a Bible scholar who read the text more carefully stood up and said, God's not finished with the Jews. For instance, St. Augustine. And then, of course, we've got the Council of Nicaea, and the church is getting organized. In the beginning, when Jesus went back to heaven, I think a lot of Christians thought, he'll be back next week, or he's going to come at least next year. And then the time went by, and they thought, I guess we're supposed to plan to stay here a while. So then the church began to get organized. And some good things came of that, and some problem things. Emperor Justinian wrote a treatise on the body of civil law, and the laws he said were very important for the Christian nations to enforce. Prohibited Jews from building synagogues, reading the book they weren't allowed to read the Bible out loud in Hebrew. They weren't allowed to assemble in public, to celebrate Passover before Easter, and to testify against Christians in court. So 500s, things are into the Christian era, things are a mixed bag. And remember, our mixed bag. This is the story of the mixed bag. Then the Islamic world begins to develop, and we have Mecca, the Muslim holy city in today's Saudi Arabia. Islam was born there in the 7th century. Muhammad, who was the founder of Islam, was born to a noble tribe in Mecca in Arabia in the year 570, and he died in 632. Muhammad had heard a variety of Christian and Jewish beliefs, and he believed the story, but he believed that they'd missed the boat and that he was actually the one he was a descendant of Ishmael. Remember, we've got Ishmael and Isaac, and Ishmael was the one who was not paying too much attention, and Isaac was the one who was chosen to be the successor of the Christian world. Muslims considered that Muhammad was the restorer of the uncorrupted original monotheistic faith. And 2 Muslim sects developed after the death of Muhammad. Today, 90% are Sunnis who believe that the leader should be chosen by the Muslim leaders, the Caliph, and the Shiites, who are only about 10% down through history, believe that the Caliph had to be a relative of Muhammad. But the pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, is a major activity in the Muslim world. And here you see something a few years back. They go to Mecca every year. In 638, the Islamic Caliph extended its dominion to Jerusalem, and the Jews were allowed to live in the city, but of course they weren't in charge. The majority of the population of Jerusalem during the time of the Arab conquest was Christian, but the Muslims took over the Temple Mount and built the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's down near the Black Dome, and that's the area in the center that covers where the temple used to stand. How many of you have been to the Temple Mount? Oh, we've got some work to do, Dave. Once we can do a tour again.
Well, I've been near it, but not on it.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
that's
no
right.
small
We
thing.
couldn't go
Yeah.
on it there. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. It's really fun to see the whole thing. Oops. Oh. And then we come to the time of the Crusades. That's when the Ottoman Empire is just beginning, and Pope Urban II. Already we had a lot of Christians up in the area of Europe, and the Pope decided that there should be a crusade for Christian knights to go to the Middle East and retake the Holy Land from the Muslim control. And tens of thousands of European knights left to go fight in the Crusades. You see that on the map there, the kind of reddish area is the Holy Roman Empire, that's the Christian part, and down in the south in the greener gray part is the Muslim area. And then, and by this time the Christians were still in charge in Israel, but this is sort of changing. 415, Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria, expelled the Jews and gave their property to a Christian mob. The beginning of forced baptisms. The Christians were not particularly kind at that time. They had a lot to learn. And the Jews were stripped of property rights. The Jews couldn't own property, couldn't own farms, which meant that they actually became able to do the one thing they were able to do, which was gather money and sell things and make loans to people. The custom of hitting a Jew in the face on Good Friday and stoning Jewish homes on Palm Sunday becomes very popular in the 10th century. And the idea of the Jews being selfish money lenders comes in here. And Jews have always really made education of young children very important. Both boys and girls were always taught to read when they were about 3 years old. They weren't taught it together, the boys here and the girls there. But when we see the Virgin Mary, who had read the Bible, she knew the story about that she was being asked to fulfill. Women could read, but in much of the rest of the world, they weren't teaching families to read. And then as okay. I'll just finish that thought. Because the Jews were kicked out and they were living all over Europe in little areas where they could have a synagogue and where they could, raise kosher food. So, but they did know how to read and write and do arithmetic, which is very nice. And when the crowned heads of Europe became very popular, and their families were, here's the king of France and the king of England, and then his son and his daughter all follow along, but those kids were not always taught to read. So they always hired Jews. So the first generation where the kids didn't know how to read, they had the Jewish families come in and they keep track of the money, they add and subtract, very useful. But then, of course, the kids hang out, and generation after generation, they begin paying some attention. So maybe 3-4 generations down the line, the King of France, the King of Italy thinks, well, we don't need the Jews anymore. We know how to teach our kids to read and write. And so then got to get rid of the Jews because they know too much. They might, take some of our money, but we just finally learned how to count. But anyway, the